Hey Keith, we're back again with another video. This time it's on tense and aspect. Very excited, love these assignments, love chatting to you. Without hearing you respond, it's great. The tense and aspect conversation is actually quite an intense debate, I found out, as it turns out. And it's argued as to how many aspects there actually are, whether it's 2 or 3. And in this video I'll attempt to explain to the best of my understanding so far what tense and aspect are, and how they're not the same thing, but how they do actually relate to each other. And there are 7 tenses we learn about in Greek: the present, future, imperfect, aorist, perfect, pluperfect, and future perfect. So we'll just keep those there. An aspect refers to the view of an action that the speaker chooses to present to the hearer. Campbell describes it simply as the viewpoint. It is argued about how many aspects there are. There's the imperative and perfective aspect, and then the argument is more about whether the aoristic aspect is actually an aspect. I'm going to argue that there's 2 aspects, simply the perfective and imperfective, and I shall say why to the best of my current ability. Verbal aspect refers to how an author views an action, event, or state, either from the inside or the outside. From the outside being the perfective aspect, while the inside being the imperfective aspect. It's like thinking of it as if a news reporter was either reporting on the ground or from a helicopter on the Hong Kong protests. From the helicopter is the perfective view. Everything is seen in a general way rather than the up-close details. So it's the external viewpoint. And then on the street, the reporter is up close, watching it all unfold. This is the imperfective view from the inside. Otherwise, we could say it's the internal viewpoint. Verbal aspect for Greek is a synthetic, systematic category. This means that aspect is realized in the morphological forms of verbs. It's encoded, and this isn't the same for all languages. Verbal aspect represents a subjective choice. You can articulate the exact same meaning but use different aspects. Ultimately, the same story is conveyed and is consistent. It's just been said in a different way depending on how the author or speaker chooses to tell the story. It's completely up to them, hence it being subjective. For example, these 2 sentences help to show the 2 viewpoints. So we've got sentence A: the protesters walked down the street, they smashed windows. And then sentence B: the protesters were walking down the street when they began smashing windows. Both of these sentences describe the exact same event in Hong Kong, but they do so differently. And this difference is verbal aspect. The actions in A are from the helicopter, viewed as a whole, the perfective aspect, and then in sentence B it's the unfolding view from the street, the imperfect aspect. So that's the difference in recognition of the imperfect and perfective aspect. And then we move on to the more complicated aoristic aspect, not an aspect. We'll try and explain. And tense isn't the whole story in Greek. There is an overlap of tenses within aspect. And this difference between the tenses is the type of action, otherwise known as actions art. And this in actions art is where I believe the so-called aoristic aspect fits in. Actions art describes how an action took place. For example, if it happened as a once occurring instantaneous event, if it was repeated over and over, or if the action focuses just on the beginning. And it can be easy to confuse actions art and aspect, not because they both start with an A. But the different scholars argue is that actions art refers to how the action takes place, and aspect refers to the viewpoint. Using Romans 5:14 as an example, you have reigned. Now, this is the overview from the outside. Reigned is the overview, the verb, and the perfective aspect, the external viewpoint. So it's from the perfective aspect. It's the external viewpoint. But when you ask what actually happened, this action took a long time. It was reigned over hundreds of years, and it was an ongoing event that spanned many years. In this case, I believe it's like the whole genealogy. This then leads on to the semantic v pragmatic. distinction in which Campbell argues that aspect is a semantic value and the aspect of a tense form does not change. An aorist will always be perfective in aspect. Actions are, on the contrary, as a pragmatic value, and its type of action depends on the context and on what actually happened. So this is the indefinite part of the aorist aspect. Ultimately, I don't want to get too caught up on this part of things because I do only have 5 minutes, which I've just gone over. But there's certainly a difference between tense and aspect, and the two are related, but definitely not the same. In summary, tense in Greek is determined by the writer's portrayal of the action with regard to aspect and to time, if it's in the indicative mood. Thanks, Keith.